Baby steps are nice, but I'm sure Nebraska fans want much more. Welcome into the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with best discussion, debate, and analysis right here. And we are going through schedules for 2025 and basically making the comparison between the 24 schedule and the 25 schedule to see if each team is looking at a more difficult path or an easier path. We will look at the Huskers following 7-6, a bowl game for the first time since 2016, and a bowl victory in defeating Boston College. Now looking to make a leap. Matt Rhule is 0-6 in his two seasons against Big Ten teams with winning records. This team needs a statement win in the conference. Let's check out the 2025 schedule. Interesting little matchup against Cincinnati on a Thursday night to open the season. The television has yet to be announced for this one. I got to think that this is going to be a Fox game with a Big Ten team involved. But again, Cincinnati, the opponent, not such an unusual week one affair there, except for it's on a Thursday night. So just one of two major games on Thursday night is typically Fox schedules a Thursday night game versus ESPN. But the game's played at Arrowhead Stadium in Cincinnati, quite interesting. These two teams got together one time, 1906. I'm sure you remember it well. Nebraska won 41-0. The Bearcats coming off a 5-7 season under Scott Satterfield. Then the next Saturday, the Huskers opened the home slate against Akron at home. The Zips were actually much improved for them. We're talking about one of the worst programs in FBS football. 4-8, 3-5 in MAC play this past season. Nebraska-Akron got together once in their history, 1997. Huskers won it 59-14. Houston Christian is the opponent for Nebraska in Week 3, September 13th. The Huskies, coming off a 5-7 season, played one power conference opponent last season. It did not go well as SMU drubbed Houston Christian 59-7. It's Houston Christian in Nebraska, September 13th, followed by the Big Ten opener. Here we go. First chance at a statement win. Nebraska's 4-8 all-time against Michigan. They have lost the last four. They have lost the last two, 79-10. Yes, Michigan came into Nebraska in 2021, and the Huskers almost pulled off an upset against the eventual Big Ten champion. Again, this would be the one game on the schedule for Nebraska to break through, especially this early in the season when most likely they will come into the game at 3-0. The place will be rocking, but if they get turned away like 35-13, then all the questions are going to come back. But if Nebraska hangs in with Michigan, then it's going to look like the same old script. Scott Frost turns into Matt Rhule. Signature win is needed, and this would be the one to get before the bye week. And then it's a date against Michigan State at home. These two schools have split 4 games since Nebraska joined the Big Ten. Nebraska owns the series 9-4. They've lost the last 2 matchups. Jonathan Smith, an excellent coach at Michigan State, in his second season trying to lift Sparty past that 5-7 season of year one. Aiden Childs at quarterback. That's how Nebraska begins October. It's followed by a trip to Maryland. Huskers have won 2 of 3 in the series, and they lost the 2023 matchup in typical Nebraska style, in which they were driving down the field for the game-winning touchdown, and they threw a pick in the end zone. MJ Morris back at quarterback for Maryland as the clear starter, with Billy Edwards moving on to Wisconsin. October 18th at Minnesota, and the Huskers. This would be a strange one to throw on most college football fans, to guess the series record all-time between Nebraska and Minnesota, but because of Minnesota dominance back in the early 60s and before that, they lead 37-25, and certainly they have been the better team in the Big Ten, winning 5 straight against Nebraska. The last time Matt Rhule faced Minnesota was in his first game as Nebraska head coach. That was on Fox on a Thursday night game. And true to form, Nebraska lost on a last-second field goal in a game in which they could have salted it away about 5 minutes left. Minnesota's going to have a new quarterback as Drake Lindsey and Zach Pyron battling for the job. Nebraska at Minnesota. We talked about the Michigan game being a statement win. This also is another one Nebraska needs to break through on, losing 5 straight to PJ Fleck. Next week, they take on Northwestern, October 25th. 10-7 is the record, Nebraska against Northwestern. If Nebraska is going to be a contender in the Big Ten, they will have to win more than 10 of every 17 games against the likes of Northwestern. Coming off a 4-8 season, Preston Stone coming in from SMU to take over the quarterbacking duties at Northwestern. Now we move on to November, and USC pays a visit to Memorial Stadium. Nebraska has never defeated the Trojans in 6 tries, 0-5-1. Lost last year at the Coliseum 28-20. They will take on, most likely, Jaden Mayava as the USC starting quarterback. On the first day of November, USC-Nebraska should be an interesting one. And then another date against an LA school, this time Nebraska traveling to UCLA. Now, they took on the 2 LA schools last year. They lost both games, including to UCLA 27-20. 7-7, the all-time series record. Nebraska could not run the ball against the Bruins last year, and Dylan Raiola was throwing the ball to the Bruins as well. November 18th, it's Nebraska at UCLA, and again, a game that Nebraska most likely really needs to win. They should be winning these kind of games. UCLA, a 5-7 team last year, 3-6 in the Big Ten, like Nebraska. Bye week before a home stretch of Penn State and Iowa. This is not easy. Going to Happy Valley. Surprisingly, Nebraska, being the inferior program since joining the Big Ten, has actually won 4 of 5 against Penn State. They own the series 10-8. This might be the best team in the Big Ten in 2025. Drew Aller back at quarterback. The double-headed monster at running back in Singleton and Allen. Possibly improved wide receiver play. Maybe the best offensive line in the Big Ten, and always athletic on defense. Nebraska at Penn State. That could be the toughest test of the season. And then, of course, it's Iowa as the permanent opponent and rival. And Iowa has won 9 of 10 in this matchup. Nebraska is 4-10 against the Hawkeyes since joining the Big Ten, despite the overall series lead. And if you're looking for a game to lay down a prop bet on a walk-off field goal, this is the one, because it seems like every year Iowa just wins on a walk-off field goal. That's the rundown game by game for the Huskers. Now let's shake out the difference between who they faced in the Big Ten last fall and who's no longer on the schedule versus who is replacing those teams, to see if we're talking about a more difficult schedule and challenge for Nebraska. They play Iowa, USC, and UCLA again. Those teams went 13-14 combined in the Big Ten. All right, the difference this season is that you've got Indiana, Ohio State, and Illinois off the schedule. That's good news. Of course, the Huskers lost all 3 of those games. Rutgers off the schedule, a formidable opponent. Mid-tier to lower-tier Big Ten, Huskers won the game 14-7. Wisconsin's off the schedule. Purdue, the worst team in the Big Ten by far, wasn't even close. They were basically a high school team last year. They're off the schedule. Okay, those 6 opponents are replaced by Penn State, Michigan, Minnesota, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Maryland. Okay, Penn State, Michigan at the top of the conference. Minnesota's formidable. And like we mentioned, Nebraska is yet to beat P.J. Fleck. Michigan State has won 2 straight against Nebraska. That's a toss-up game, and it has been in recent years. But again, Michigan State's the type program that Nebraska needs to start defeating 3/4 of the time. Northwestern and Maryland better not be threats, or Nebraska is having a rough season in 2025. So they are losing teams in Indiana, Ohio State, Illinois, Rutgers, Wisconsin, and Purdue that went 28-26 in the Big Ten, though Purdue weighs that down heavily at 0-9. They replaced that with the 6 that you see there that went 24-30, pretty much of a trade-off. If anything, statistically, it's a slightly weaker schedule. And again, consider that Matt Rule is 0-6 against teams with winning records in the Big Ten, and only 2 of those games come from Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. So he's losing to the mid-tier of the Big Ten consistently over and over and over. I think the most important game on the schedule for Nebraska is the Michigan game. Do they have to win that game? Of course not. They can lose that game and still have a successful season, win 8 or 9 games, or even maybe challenge for a college football playoff appearance. But based on where it's placed in the schedule early in the season, again, Can Nebraska break through? And that would be the statement win. Now, in regards to their peers in the Big Ten, I think the biggest game is Iowa, of course. Now, what's Nebraska going to be playing for at that stage of the season? Could be just a better bowl game. They could be looking at, 7-5 versus 8-4. And possibly the biggest game because of the Iowa game back-ended at the end of the season when maybe all is lost at that point in regards to really high goals would be the Minnesota game. Nebraska's got to defeat Minnesota and PJ Fleck, 5 consecutive losses. They go to Minnesota. That's a peer-level game that Nebraska needs to break through. They keep losing those games. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the video and subscribe. Comments down below. And we will see you for the College Football Show, which comes your way Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.